So our main point this evening is to talk about the hero's journey, which is associated with a writer called Joseph Campbell, who was writing in the 20th century. Campbell's hero's journey, sometimes known as a monomyth, is the idea that many myths and stories share a recurring pattern. The broad shape is that you start off in an ordinary world, something disrupts that, you're called to adventure, you cross some kind of threshold, you're presented with trials and temptations, there's ordeals, perhaps a descent and difficulties, then some kind of transformation and a return. Now, if this was a screenwriting group and not a philosophy group, I would outline the whole 17 points of Campbell's journey, but that's not what we're doing this evening. So the question is whether this is just a story pattern or whether it says something about human development. So as you know, over the past few weeks, we had one talk by our guest speaker, Agni, on suffering, and I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago on Jung. And this kind of ties those two together. Suffering raised the question, can ordeals transform us? And Jung raised the question, do myths and symbols reveal deep patterns of the psyche? Campbell's hero's journey brings those together, suffering, archetype, transformation, and return. So one of the questions I want to pose tonight is the hero a model for individual development? The hero leaves the familiar world and is forced to encounter difficulty, fear, temptation, loss, and uncertainty. On this reading, the hero is not just somebody who wins battles, but the hero represents a human being who is tested and changed, but is being heroic the same as becoming developed or fulfilled. Campbell links naturally to Jung because the hero's journey contains archetypal figures and moments. So, for example, we'll see the hero, the mentor, the shadow, descent, death and rebirth and return. These are all strong Jungian archetypes, but also occur in Campbell's journey. In Jungian terms, the journey can be read as a movement towards individuation. The hero confronts hidden, feared, or undeveloped parts of the self. So the journey may be about becoming more whole, not merely more successful. But we can still ask, does the Campbell hero actually become whole or merely heroic? Heroism and wholeness are not automatically the same. Heroism may involve courage, endurance, risk, sacrifice, and action under pressure. Wholeness suggests something broader: integration, balance, self-knowledge, reconciliation with the shadow, the development of the whole person. A person might be heroic without being whole, and a person might be psychologically transformed without becoming fully developed. So the hero's journey may dramatize development, but it does not automatically prove that development has been achieved. Now I now want to introduce my old friend Aristotle, who seems to turn up very often in these talks, although of course he was writing thousands of years before Jung. So we should not pretend that Aristotle is talking about Jung's individuation. But Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia can be interpreted as something close to a rounded development of the whole person. This term eudaimonia means flourishing over a whole life. So for Aristotle, this involves developing the virtues of character. So, for example, courage in relation to fear and danger, temperance and self-control, and things such as generosity. But Aristotle also requires that we develop, the Greek word is phronesis, sometimes translated as practical wisdom. In other words, Aristotle is not asking for one heroic trait. He is describing a rounded formation of character across a life as a whole. So we might say Aristotle gives us an ethical version of wholeness, character, emotion, desire, judgement and action brought into proper function. The hero's journey does not end with private transformation. The hero returns, and that return matters because it tests whether the transformation has meaning beyond the individual. The hero may return with wisdom, healing, renewal, courage, reconciliation, an example of how to live. This connects both with Jung and Aristotle. Jung gives us psychological integration, and Aristotle reminds us that a developed human life is lived with others, not merely inside the self. The hero's journey is often used as a tool for writers, films and screenplays, a way of structuring a story so that the central character leaves the familiar world, faces trials, is transformed and returns changed. But tonight we have been looking at it less as a formula for writing stories and more as a possible model for the development of the self. This raises a deeper question. Do we, in some sense, have to break from our origins, from our childhood, habit, security, inherited identity, or the world that first formed us in order to develop? Do we have to pass through trial, suffering, temptation, and uncertainty in order to become what we might be? Of course, this does not mean that everybody must literally leave home or go on some grand external adventure. Many people develop by staying, by becoming parents, neighbours, carers, friends, citizens, or reliable members of a community. Their journey may not look heroic in the cinematic sense, but may involve real trial, sacrifice, patience, and transformation. So perhaps the hero's journey is best understood metaphorically. The break from the familiar world may be a break from childhood, illusion, selfishness, or an old understanding of oneself. The trials may be the ordinary but demanding trials of love, work, responsibility, and loss. On that reading, the question is not whether we become heroes in the dramatic sense, but whether human development requires some encounter with difficulty that changes how we live. Campbell gives us the mythic pattern. Jung lets us ask whether this is a journey towards wholeness, and Aristotle gives us a way of thinking about rounded human development, where character, emotion, desire, judgement, and action are gradually brought into relation. So perhaps the final question is not simply whether the hero's journey makes good stories, but whether it tells us something about how human beings become more fully themselves. Okay, thank you.